for people that were here this morning, the point about this, when we back in the summer, what we tried to do was to look at some of the blockers, some of the things that we think are going to cause a break in the golden thread, and cause a challenge in terms of being able to deliver against the New Building Safety Act. So the one that we went through this morning was the challenge of how can we, for example, Emma was giving the example of a fire door this morning, but it's the same with most of the principal assets, that in many ways, if you've got something like a door or a penetration seal or a smoke damper, being able to record against that explicit smoke damper, that's the one that was, what's the performance requirement on that, the specification, what is the what's the installation details if it's new, if it's not new, what information have you got about when it was last inspected? Has somebody done any check to see that smoke damper is in the right wall, the right type of wall? Because those are the sorts of things that we now require some assurance on. And then subsequently, when that smoke detector or fire door, smoke damper or fire door is inspected in the future, how do we ensure that the inspection is actually recorded against the same asset? Because what we're finding is that there's some great applications for doing mobile inspections, but they create their own information each time. So that was the one this morning. So this one is addressing the next challenge about the way, certainly on design and build, that a lot of the detailed design is actually being carried out during construction. So the impact of that, as I understand it, one impact of that is that the building services routes and also the size of penetration seals, for example, is wrong. Yeah. It's not a mistake by the designers. It's because the design hasn't been adequately complete because of procurement, and therefore the M&E contractor will look at the proposed design, the performance specification even, and then they will then design what products are going to be used, and that can impact on the size of pipework. So people like Paul White can probably speak about that much better than me. But the impact of that from a safety perspective is that the dry lining and the compartmentation has already been built, and the builder's work holes that maybe Anna might have put in or located, are actually slightly in the wrong place. So therefore they've got to be, I presume they've got to be sealed up again and new holes cut. And of course that compromises the integrity of the firewall. So in theory, that's going to be solved now, because all of the detailed design is going to be completed by Gateway 2. Fantastic. Yeah. And we're moving on to a situation where it's an extraordinary concept, but the idea is that you finish the design before you build it, which is, in any other industry, people would say that's a logical thing to do, but largely because of procurement reasons and the like, that isn't the way we work at the moment. So all of that's got to change, but I'm not sure that clients have really understood that that's going to change. I don't think construction companies have been given the opportunity to make that change. So people like Paula from Waits, we've been discussing this, Paula, haven't we, for probably 2 years. And it is something that there's the more forward-thinking contractors are well on board with, but we're constrained by the way procurement's done. So anyway, that's the background. So we ran a series of questions that came out of the various different working groups. There's 4 questions. So one of them we did this morning. This one is about the largely the M&E design. I think anyway, but perhaps perhaps there's lots of others. And then we've got 2 more next week. So over to you, Richard. You're on mute, Richard.
Jess, do you want to put the question up? There we go. How do we ensure that the incomplete building services design does not impact construction? Now, we've got a number of answers or relevant points to this that have been contributed over this last 6 months since we've been doing this, and they are there. Some of you will have seen an email asking you to rank maybe the top 3 that you think are the most important. Now, we've had some input from a few people on that. So I think a good way for us to start is to take a couple of these that have been put forward, and we'll put on the spot the person who put this forward. Okay, let's have a look. What's popular? Okay, let's start at the top. The design of a building should be complete before construction to avoid mistakes and uninformed decisions. Design changes should be minimal to prevent budget. I mean, George has touched on that already, but Paul White put that as one of his preferences. So can I bring you in, Paul, to elaborate on that?
I'm not sure when I did that, but anyway, fair enough. I think it's the same as we're looking at. Is this that what you're looking to do against the design at the moment is procure it against something that nobody knows where the boundaries are, and not knowing where the boundaries are, you are requiring people to contractually take responsibility for this design because you don't want the responsibility. And I think this the whole point about having a principal designer is that they take responsibility. And in terms of most of the things that I look at, I'm not even seeing a design document. I will see a fire strategy, which is an opinion. I see a specification, which is not good. And at that point, somebody's building something from that, and there's a few drawings and bits and pieces, but there's nothing specific. And the point is you've got all the issues with regard to where everything goes, what order it goes in at. So a lot of this is from the construction point of view, from the construction contractor, is they're being told that they're responsible for the design as contractually, but they've been given a whole load of opinion and I tend to call them kitchen sink specifications, because they've got everything in them because nobody wants to be wrong, and therefore you're relying on somebody for the design and designing on the hoof as a contractor design portion. You're relying on people who don't necessarily know what they're doing. And therefore, if the building was designed fully such that everybody accepted it, then that would be great. Now, on HRBs, potentially you've got Gateway 2, but I still don't know that we're actually going to get a proper design at that point. Or if we are, then various people would have committed to time and money to be part of that. And then if it goes out for quote at that point in time, then that's all been wasted money. So it's partly that, yes, the design needs to be done, but also it needs to be very, very clear where responsibility for design lies. Because if you're taking responsibility for a design and it says something in the fire strategy, I'm not sure contractually now whether you're essentially following an opinion which may or may not be right, but that person who's made that doesn't seem to have any responsibility.
Yeah, we had this actually in our other questions, didn't we? That we did the other week. The role of principal designer, and when that is passed over, and it was all a little unclear. Paula.
Thanks, Richard. I was just going to top and tail on my soapbox that I got on this morning about process. And I think we need to be a bit courageous about combining what is the RIBA Plan of Works and the BISRIA BG6, because they work as two separate isolated processes that don't always talk to each other. Now, I can see it from the other side of the fence as a main contractor who we have SES as part of the Waits family, if you like. So we're much closer to our building services colleagues, and we can have those open and frank discussions about what information we need, who's responsible for it, are they providing it from a competent set of people, and how does that dovetail into what we're trying to do from a bricks and sticks point of view. But not everybody has that in the industry. And that being said, we haven't got it perfect either, because people still tend to worry about their own bit of the building. But I think it'd be interesting to see what Anna's view is as well. But I think we need to dovetail and not separate the process so that it's inextricably linked. And exactly as Paul says, you've designed it at the end of stage 4, that everyone understands that stage 4 also includes the CDP elements. And that we completely get rid of any, or make it really hard for people to change the design or shoehorn value engineering in at stage 4. That should be game over ahead of Gateway 2. That's my view.
Hi, everyone. I totally agree with Paula. Kind of restructuring of both probably BISRIA and RIBA stages will need to kind of happen after we see what the real kind of repercussions of Building Safety Act are in practice. However, two things to remember. One, which is that the procurement as such we have at the moment, which is popular in UK and across the world, is here because it offers certain commercial advantages to the clients. It also removes the risk from the client. So both of those things are good for clients. Therefore, that's why DMB became very popular. So we're fighting incredibly tough forces of money. Yeah. So it's very nice that we all as designers agree that design should be completed at a certain stage, but frankly, we all also want to pass the responsibility mostly onto the contractor to, resolve things that haven't quite been resolved during the design. So that's one thing to remember. So I don't think we're ever going to arrive at a complete design that never changes. And then follow-up point after that is that I don't think we should be too scared of the changes. I think changes are inevitable on a project. You will have to deal with change all the way until you literally hand over the project. There is no such place where your design at stage 5 will not change during the construction, because things will happen that you haven't even accounted for, especially if you are refitting an existing building, or if you're working on a project that has a complex set of stakeholders. If you've ever worked in healthcare or education, you know that by the time you're building the school or the hospital, half of your brief have been thrown away and new brief will arrive. What I'm trying to say is it's not, we shouldn't be freaked out by change. We should be just getting very good at acknowledging which changes are significant, which changes are really, really going to put the risk to the project. And frankly, cutting new openings and putting new, fire barriers, it's cost, but it's not impossible. Working with a good subcontractor who is going to advise you on the correct fire barriers is essential, and you need to then try and employ that subcontractor later on, because it's not much point working with them in the design, handing over your beautifully coordinated fire building openings and everything, and then the subcontractor gets sacked because they're too expensive, or they don't really fit the main contract. So what I'm trying to say, I'm not being pessimistic, but what I'm trying to say is we shouldn't be too afraid of the changes. We can accompany quite a lot of the changes during the construction. That's normal in construction, but I think we should, in this process, become better in understanding which changes are the real risk to do.
So you're actually disagreeing. You're actually disagreeing with that point. Then it doesn't need.
I am disagreeing. Yes, I'm disagreeing because I'm being realistic. I can't. I really can't see. I can't see the design being complete at stage 4.
Paul.
Who's going to bring the subcontractors on board? Just think about it, factually. Like who's going to pay for the subcontractor to do the design in stage 4? No one. Ever.
Paula is.
Well,
Paula is.
Yeah, we do.
Paula, how much money have you got?
I think that's the point, in the fact that what we're actually looking at here is people designing buildings who don't know how to do it, and therefore they ought to know some of this stuff. And I think they're going to realise that they need to start learning it and having specialists within their own business to do it.
I don't think it's to do with knowledge.
Pardon?
It's not to do with knowledge. Have you ever tried to install a large boiler in your house?
Yes.
Your plumber might arrive with a different boiler on the day of the delivery, and you might have to redesign. You might have to redesign your whole whole bathroom.
But if he arrived with a boiler, the wrong boiler, I'd send him away again.
It's not a wrong boiler. Maybe that boiler had to be discontinued, and you're getting a new boiler because it's much better.
Then he should have discussed it with me. He should have discussed it with me. So I'm going to waste his time at that point.
You live in a beautiful world.
The issue you've got, particularly with HRBs, is if you move a hole in a wall, or it's the wrong wall in the first place, and the contractor finds it out, he's going to send it straight back to you, and you're going to have to put it through building control, and it's going to take 6 weeks. Right? So if that then happens on 3 or 4 occasions, that's 18 weeks out of your program that can't be done. And therefore, after that point, if they're waiting on that to be done, all the other things are going to get pushed back. And I think this is something that nobody's actually cottoned onto yet. If this is an HRB, certain changes require you to put it back through building control, and they only have to respond within 6 weeks. And you don't want that, because at that point, whose fault is it going to be? Well, it wasn't designed right. I can't do anything about it. I didn't know about this. I've had to go back to the designer, and it's got to go back through building control. And you can't put that down on the contractors if the program goes out, because it's not fair. Because something is wrong to start with. Sorry,
Tom, you had your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just thinking that we I'm disagreeing with what Anna's got to say. I think she's defending a broken system, and this is I know it's there will be a fundamental change in the way that things are done, where procurement and frameworks will have to have changed to accommodate this system, because the fiscal implication of, as we've just said, these continual 6-week delays on both time and budget will be unsustainable from the client's point of view. And I don't see any benefit in saying, but we've always done it this way. It's the classic thing. The way we've done it has become more and more broken, has veered off further and further and further over the past 10, 20, 30 years. This is an opportunity for the reset that we need to actually really address bringing on board the whole supply chain earlier on. And I think there are mechanisms in place that can start doing that. We have frameworks. We've got used to doing frameworks. It needs to be written into those sort of things. We've got the playbook, and there's so much need for change. There is need for change, and this is the hook on which we hang that change. And you know, there is no reason why the design can't be the design. We've done this ourselves when I've been, you know, from where we've had jobs on site that have been fully designed.
Sorry, Tom, where are you from?
Oh, sorry, I'm currently at Ryder Levitt Bucknell. I've worked at TNT, but I've also worked client side with councils, with the NHS and stuff like that.
Cool.
When we've had fully designed projects with particularly with the council, we have had problems on site because people didn't stick to the drawings because we designed a Class 3 building. Once people realised that the design was fully Class 3 and they just had to fit what had been designed, it worked. You know, no issues. That's just what we've got to do. We've got to be fully designed as we go to site and bring everybody in early. Or just now, because all I'm going to do is repeat myself in different words.
Paula.
I just wanted to come back on a couple of Anna's points. I agree, Anna, there's nothing to be frightened of with change, and we can expect change when it's
Absolutely
born of surveys and discovery. What my point is, because we can't do anything about that. My point is we shouldn't be actively looking for change to suit commercial viability, for example, because that's when it all goes absolutely boob skyward and that's where the problems happen. And the other thing, there was just one other point, because I think this is fundamental here. You said you must have a lot of money if you're engaging specialists in stage 4. Stage 4 is when we engage specialists. That's CDP. There's no design in stage 5. That's embellishment in technical detail. So there's a crossover. As you know, stage 4 and stage 5, we engage the specialists in stage 4 because it's a CDP is a stage 4 activity. And if we don't understand that as an industry, we're already on the back foot because we chuck everything into the stage 5 bucket and it's too late then.
Yeah, but you might not be in contract in stage 4, so you can engage professionally, you can engage your subcontractors as much as you like. You know, you're not going to be paying them until you get into contract. So guys, I'm not bringing doom here. I am talking about, design is a complex beast. It depends which sector you're working on, depends what kind of size of contract you're dealing with. I'm not condoning not completing design in stage 4, not promoting it. All I'm saying is an aspect of completing or adjusting design will still remain once all subcontractors have been procured. And in fact, once we know where they're buying their stuff from, basically, yeah? A subcontractor will depend on a chain of suppliers. Their suppliers might go under by the time you actually procure the project, yeah? So what I'm trying to say is I'm not defending a failing system. I'd love to complete my design at stage 4 and go to site on stage 5 and simply just watch everything being installed in a sequence that we predicted in our BIM models. How often does this happen? Almost never on projects, yeah? Because you could have a beautifully coordinated clash-free model, and then you go on site and actually MEP have installed sprinklers before they've installed the ventilation.
But that's
like
a site management problem. That's exactly the problem that we've had.
Absolutely,
it needs managing,
absolutely.
and you manage it out of the system.
Can
So that's where the system's broken. We don't allow that. We come down on it, and that's where the change needs to be. We sacked a site manager, brought in the right one.
I just want to interrupt. Emma's put a pertinent question in the chat to you, Anna. How much conversation do you have with manufacturers at the design stage?
We have a lot, but it's not guaranteed that those specific manufacturers will actually be used on the job. That's how procurement usually works. But especially when it comes down to detail. So, for example, fire stopping.
Not a point in talking to manufacturers and then that you're not going to use, is there?
No, there is because you are
part of the
investigation.
Design. Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, yes, but surely you would be talking to the ones that you did choose. No, you say no. That's what I'm getting.
Sorry, Richard. The problem is the problem is procurement process currently means that the designer, if the designer actually selects a product and promotes a product, they're outside of their contractual, you know, it can breach procurement. Now, that's wrong in my view, and I think under the new rules it's changing, because I believe certainly for the safety critical products or things that impact on safety critical elements, those items, correct me if I'm wrong, Anna, they have to be selected before Gateway 2, end of Gateway 2.
They can be selected, but other things can influence their selection later on, if that makes. This building is like a kind of breathing, living system, yeah.
Yeah.
So
sure.
you change some things, and other things will have to change because of that. So you might not want to change your fire stopping subcontractor because you spent weeks talking to them and you scheduled all your fire stopping builders works in your model, and you've done everything lovely, design scheduled, everyone knows what we're buying, and then the main contractor changes the MEP subcontractor, and the MEP subcontractor decide to go to another subcontractor. These things just happen every day. I'm not defending the system. It's real life, because projects take a long time as well. We might be finishing our stage 4 for a phase development for maybe 3 of the buildings, and the other 4 buildings will only become stage 4 maybe next year. Yeah. In that meantime, all the lovely coordination that we've done on the basis of the design for these first 3 buildings will go out of the window, because the subcontractor has gone bust, and now we have to use new doors, new windows, and a different ventilation system. Do you understand? So what I'm trying to say is,
let me bring Paul in. Let me bring Paul in. He's been very patient.
Thank you. No, I mean, again, but also, I mean, that part of it, I agree with Anna, because certain products you can just specify, but you have to be aware of what structure they're going in, and therefore you might be able to make a specification, but if it can't be fitted in the space that you've given it, then that becomes a major change, and you've got a big problem, and that isn't the contractor's fault if you haven't given them enough space to put something. Exactly as you were saying with regard to the boiler. But the other point is, and this is my biggest issue, is smoke control is not a CDP issue. Because if you haven't designed the building so you can fit it in the first place, it doesn't matter how much you shout and scream about it, you end up with a compromised system that's wrong, or you actually shouldn't fit it, simply because the shafts aren't in the right place. And this is a particular issue because you're then requiring a contractor who doesn't know anything about it and can't change the design of the building because it's there. You're then putting the onus onto the subcontractor, who's now trying to come up with a solution that they're not really allowed to come up with, or they're not designers. So you need to be careful about what you're pushing down to CDP. And particularly as you're talking about in a phase situation, you know, if one of the subcontractors has gone bust, it doesn't matter, because on the smoke control system, everything still needs to be in the right place. But if you change something else, like you decide to put another floor in or move something around and put walls in different places, you screw smoke control. So you've got to be aware of these things before you get into this state of moving on to the contractors.
Emma, you had your hand up. Do you want to say something?
I did. It was quite similar to what Paul was saying there, but excuse, I'm not a designer or an architect. So my background is in manufacturing, distribution, and also contractor side, fire safety and general construction. So in regards to sort of specification of products and things, something that I've found quite striking when I've been out on site with principal contractors is the fact that they're not engaging with manufacturers of products at early stages. They're not allowing the right spacing, the right design for these products to be suitably installed into the building to lead them to be effective. For instance, there's no spacing for letterboxing for passive fire stopping, or if there is, it's either too close to another wall, so can't be effectively, stopped itself. Smoke control's a massive thing that I've seen. Dampers being put into ventilation channels where you can't actually inspect them for your due diligence checks, all of that type of thing that's happening. Plus also what we're seeing back in my days when I was working in sort of distribution and distribution of products was the fact that you'll get a contractor, a subcontractor, ring up a builder's merchant, and it's national or small ones, and they'll say, I need, I don't know, X number of sheets of fireboard in this brand. The merchant might not stock that brand because they might not have an affiliation with them. And they go, we've got an alternative product for you. It might perform the same. And they're putting in products that haven't actually been specified or designed for that building. And then potentially for things like fire stopping, they're being covered up prior to building control getting in. So then you've got a potential Grenfell situation where you've got incorrect or not suitable products being used on a build on the advice of someone that doesn't have the competence levels of an architect or a designer to do so.
Thank you, Emma. I think that's been very
Ron.
helpful.
Sorry, George, did you want to say something?
No, I was just congratulating Emma on that, because I think that was very clear.
Ron.
Yes, hi.
Where are you from, Ron?
I was born in South Africa and I moved into Ireland a year ago.
What company?
No, yeah, thanks. Say yeah, we have a trophy. The reason I said the South African thing is I spent a lot of my time in South Africa. I've been in Ireland for a year, and a comment was made when we had our first speaker speaking on point one, and I've been struggling with an item here, and that is that the designer doesn't seem to be responsible for the design of the building for life. Okay, and the designer has the ability to, as soon as it gets tricky, give the design responsibility away. That's incredibly foreign to me. Okay, so in my life, I've done some big basement designs, 50,000 square meter basements, multiple levels, and there is always some bright spark when the design's all finished and I've spent hundreds of thousands of rands, which is a few euros, okay, on a CFD, is they come and change the equipment and I have to evaluate a different design alternative. That doesn't save the client money. It costs me money. So the client may save a little bit of money, but he loses design time. And then I've got to now redo all the modeling to prove whether the other design doesn't work. So if the design has been undertaken, I believe the designer should be responsible for that, okay, from start to finish, including overseeing the commissioning. It will then make it almost impossible for someone to come with a bright spark idea and change things. My discipline, smoke control. So I'm last in the building. I'm at the highest part of the building and I'm the most forgotten, and smoke kills more people in the building than anything else. 66% of deaths are related to smoke in the fire. Okay. So why if the designer has specified a product, is some M&E subcontractor doing a deal with a builder to save some money, and then the designer has to redesign? So I think the system's broken at the design end, not at the contracting end.
Arguably as well, it's procurement. I think that's the point, Ron, because it's where the money lies. I've got a question, if I may, just for whilst I remember, for Paula. So Paula, you were saying that you're typically procuring the M&E, for example, during work stage 4. How common is that? Because I've certainly come across many contractors that tell me that until they're in contract, which is normally at the end of work stage 4, that's the impression I get. They don't want to commit to the to paying an M&E contractor.
So M&E is a bit different because obviously it's split up into feasible, generic, and all of that sort of stuff. So you've got those subheadings underneath the heading of stage 4. But George, we're a design and build contractor, so we don't just inherit the design and try and build what we've got. We get involved in stage 4 to try and make the base design, the consultant based design, buildable with our specialist partners. And so that's our mode of operation. Which is slightly different to where Anna was coming from. We don't just enter stage left at stage 5 and then try and change everything. We try and work with the consultant team to make sure the base design is complete, compliant and coordinated and buildable. And that's what we do. We get involved. And if we can get involved at stage 3 or earlier, even better. But yes, we do procure our specialists for most key packages at the latter end of stage 4. So consultant based design front end, CDP middle, CDP integration into the back end, into the base design, sorry, at the back end.
Am I right that there's a lot of the during that you have a pre-construction service agreement on certain projects? Most
of them nowadays, George.
Yeah, and that pre-construction service agreement only takes you up to the end of work stage 4. Is that right?
In most cases, yes.
Yeah. So at that stage, you are being paid presumably by the client organization to develop the design to a level of certainty so that you can then commit to delivering something that's a complete design.
What happens for us mostly is we shepherd along the design team at the stage 4 consultant based design period. Then we go into contract at the start of stage 5, but we know that stage 4 overlaps. So the overlap occurs with the CDP elements happening whilst we're doing all the enabling works on site. So stage 4 runs in parallel with stage 5 on most projects, as the plan of work states. So we work with the consultants to get the fundamentals right, and then we bring in the specialists at the appropriate time based on the critical path.
So if, for example, when you appoint, I'm just going by the example that I was given, which is probably a fairly simple one from the complexity that I know that you guys are all dealing with. But if, for example, we're talking about the mechanical services, say, my understanding is that the M&E consultant's design goes to a certain level, certain routes and certain products, yeah. But when the M&E contractors engage, and clearly it depends on the projects. I mean, some M&E contractors will install exactly what the M&E consultant has designed, but in many cases they don't, and actually they create a brand new model in most cases. And the reason they create a brand new model is because the sizes of the pipes or the size of the duct or the location of certain items and bends and things like that cause an impact on where the routes are. So therefore, what I understand is therefore you end up with, as you say, as Anna was saying, it's a staged delivery, and when people are then putting partitioning in, for example, that may be installed before the M&E contractor has completed their detailed coordinated models.
Yeah, I'm a visual person, so I'd like to sketch this out, but if I try and explain it as eloquently as I can. So old 4A, feasible generic, that's with the consultant. We usually keep old 4B, which is coordinated generic with the consultant, and then we bring our specialists in at old 4C, which is coordinated specific. So, but what we do at that 4B stage is we hold the hand of the consultant with the bricks and sticks so that we shouldn't be a million miles away, and we might get pipes that graze, you know, structural elements here or there in the model, but it'll all come out in the wash by, you know, if it's 50 mil here or 50 mil there. But it also allows us to check from a fire safety critical element point of view that we're not moving away from a compliant solution. So we get involved earlier, and then the contractor will make it a reality on site. Does that answer your question? So there's overlap earlier on between contractor and consultant.
And at the end, that when you bring the CDP M&E contractor in, for example, would they then come in at risk, or would you be paying them for their time on that? We
pay them at 4C, but we've got such a partnering relationship with them that we ask them to come to the table and give us a risk and opportunities appraisal for what's being proposed. Yeah. To get us on the right foot before we get into full contract. And that's the way we operate. It might not be the same for other main contractors, but that's how we try and de-risk what we're trying to do, George. Yeah. I mean, from what I understand, I think Waite's particularly good at this. But I know you've worked for other contractors. How common is that? So yeah, my previous life at Bouygues, because we had an in-house building services, energies and services team there as well, it's very similar. So I think we probably capitalise on the fact that we've got all that in-house specialism, and we're literally across the corridor from each other. So we go and sit and go through the drawings together. It's a useful team to have for collaboration. Cool. Okay, good.
Okay, let's look at another question.
Could I quickly pick up on the point? Of
course,
stage 4 being split into 3 stage 4s and 2 stage 4s or whatever.
That's MEP, Anna. That's MEP.
Yeah, MEP. Well, exactly, but MEP influences everything else, right? I mean, nowadays the buildings are like machines. Usually, and we work mostly on DMB projects, so we work on large, complex, not all high risk, but lots of advanced tech as well, which requires really, really careful fire safety kind of strategy. Usually, the actual specific meaning kit design does not happen until the subcontractor is first fully appointed, and then that subcontractor, MEP subcontractor, is appointed their supply chain and their subcontractors, their further subcontractors.
That's 4C, yeah? That's 4C.
Yes, that's 4C. Yeah. So really, usually with, for example, a large fan wall that is a big thing that can change on projects, we might not know how big or where it's coming from until that specific design has happened, and that's 4C. By that time, we're well into stage 5. I know it's called 4C. It's called 4C, but we are in construction,
You can set the zone, though, Anna, for it. You can set the zone earlier on.
Absolutely.
And only is an issue if for whatever reason you deviate from that zone or your access arrangements change. Otherwise, that's
not if we deviate, if the subcontractor deviates.
No,
we're using a word designer in a very strange way. We are pretending that there is one designer. There isn't one designer on the project. All consultants are designers, and then furthermore, the subcontractors are designers.
Not all consultants are designer, only the ones with design responsibility. But we wouldn't deviate from a specified product. Unless, as you say, it's been discontinued, we would rally against change for the very reasons that Ron has mentioned, because you come unstuck. Everyone comes unstuck, and then you try to fill in the gaps. You try and back it up, and you can never do that. It doesn't work.
But can we then agree that instead of pretending that world is going to change overnight, which it isn't. The actually one big takeaway from the question 1 is that actually design needs to be a bit looser so that it allows change at later stage, and that actually what we need to watch out is those big changes that influence everything else, like for example the change of a ventilation system, or a change of the location of the air handling units, or the change of the door system, or that there are certain aspects of the design that will change everything else. Other things we
I'm
can
in the
deal with on
opposite
the
place.
side.
Paul,
I'm in the
I think
opposite
Paul's going to
place
come
there.
back at you. Paul.
Yeah, I would say I have to say that if you've put in risers and you thought that they can squeeze a 600 mm duct into a 650 by 650 riser, and then put a damper in which needs over 100 millimeters all around it, and you have to be able to get to both sides of it to check it on an ongoing basis, that has to be sorted. That's not a coordination issue. That is, I cannot build this issue. It's not a fan wall where you've got this. You are squeezing everything into too tight a space where people will not be able to solve your problems for you. And if you continue to ignore that, you are going to run into what I was saying on the HRB thing. And worse than that, you're going to run into things like Part L, because you're going to have to make constrictions in ductwork, and there you're going to use more energy, or your fans get bigger. And all these things are not the contractor's fault, because they don't have the space to do it. If you decide it's the wrong damper and you suddenly need to protect the escape route, A, it's bigger, B, it's got more pressure drop. That is a huge change, and it doesn't just affect the fire safety, because the fire safety is then dealt with if the product's installed properly, but you've got Part L and Part F issues. So, and smoke control, again, you've got potentially Part M issues. It doesn't work. You're extracting from the wrong place. You're extracting full stop, which I have a problem with. And, it's none of these things can be solved after the design, because they all need more space. And if you don't provide that space because the client's going, I need more lettable space, then you've got a problem. Because on year 1 now, if all the fire dampers have been installed and people can't get to them, that's going to now be found out, because they need to be checked every month. And somebody's going to get a report, and they're going to go back to, the client's going to go back to, who allowed this to happen? And then it's going to go fundamentally back, well, there was never any space to put any access in, so we didn't bother. But that's a design issue. It's not a subcontractor or a contractor's issue. And it's been going on for years, and it's got worse because lettable space has become the important part.
I think it's Anna's understandably, because obviously she's Anna works for Scott Brown Rig, which is obviously a very respected practice, and you're working on some very complex projects, aren't you, Anna?
Mm-hmm.
So we're not looking at this through rose tinted glasses. That's the point about having this community, actually, I think, because all too often people come up with a process map and say, this is what we're going to do, everybody go out and do it, and there's no, the purpose of these meetings is actually to uncover where those uncomfortable difficulties are and try and flush them out. So, and I think it's also the case that we need to make sure that clients' organizations are aware of this complexity, because
absolutely.
Often they don't. I was saying this morning that we're working on a project at the moment where it's taken us 4 months to find out who installed the fire doors, the communal fire doors, and we still don't know.
4 months.
We still don't know. On a brand new project that's being handed over, we still can't find out who actually installed
and that's
them.
a very realistic situation, George.
Yeah.
thank you for just quantifying what's going on. I'm not trying to be difficult in a meeting. What I'm trying to illustrate is that design is a very organic process, and as much as we would like to fit it into a sort of lovely RIBA linear kind of thing, in fact, almost no projects ever work in a linear way. They go forward, then they go back for some reason, then something else happens, then the client changes their mind, and the MEP subcontractor goes bust, then we have to work with another. And again, it's not because we want to change our minds or we want to save money to the client necessarily. We do want to save money to the client because ultimately they are our client, but they will be your client as well if you're working for them. So I think we're, I think it's worth just being aware of things that we can do rather than being completely pretending that they're not going to happen. That's all I'm trying to say.
Well, as George said, this is the point of BIM for Housing, that we bring together all stakeholder groups.
Yeah.
So that all perspectives are, well, hope as near as damn it, all perspectives are covered. So that everyone can understand everybody else's issues. I would like to move on to another question, unless anybody's got anything pressing they want to say. Okay, let's do this one. Rethinking procurement processes can help ensure a smoother transition from design to construction. Now, we've touched on that, but so who's got some suggestions about how to improve procurement processes? Paula has immediately.
It's only because it's something we're doing, Richard, is we're going out earlier on a stage 3 design now to our subbies to get their view, to get their input. And we're not paying them at that stage, but that's what we're doing, because the idea is if they get embedded in what's being proposed and then we embellish with more detail as it's being delivered by the consultant team, that we'll be ahead of the game. And we should have ironed out some of those coordination issues earlier on.
All right, okay, that's clear.
And that's probably based on trust and relationships, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think George touched on it earlier. A lot of the problems that we have is the existing procurement processes prohibit people from making specific choices early on during the design of a building or whatever it's going to be. Because of performance, we are hobbled with contracts going out as performance specs rather than actual specifications. We've got vague ideas of what we want, and for various internal reasons, clients aren't allowed to actually say what they want. I know I've worked with one council who aren't allowed to specify the boilers that they want in housing for procurement rules. But they don't want that. But so they end up with, in every house, a boiler that they don't want. And then when it fails because of value engineering, i.e. going for the cheapest piece of shit that's available, they then put in the boiler that they do want, which means they have to refit the whole kind of boiler room and all that, and it causes problems. Whereas, you would save time, you would save money if you could just specify right at the beginning exactly what you want. So I think procurement rules through frameworks, through the government in particular, who they never want to get off the fence with regard to any specification. There needs to be an understanding that for cost assurance and time assurance and design assurance, that actually being specific with the requirements is a good thing, and that procurement should be allowed to specify exactly what they want rather than vaguely what they want. I think there are frameworks which we're all part of that could be an enabler of that, where the rules are allowed to change. It's going to be tricky, but I do think there needs to be something.
I completely understand what you're saying, but also, I think the specification is certainly the starting point. But the other thing you have to be aware of is if everybody then decides that that product is the best one for everybody, you all specify it, and then the next thing you know, you won't be able to get them because
think
everybody
about-
else is buying the same thing.
But then look at what the Ministry of Justice have done with their new prison scheme, where they've come up with a common set of designs that for the cruciform buildings that are being used by various different contractors and are being made in multiple factories because there's a common design, and they've decided exactly what it is that they want, so they can distribute that manufacture of that particular product across the country and across different supply chains. So they've rethought the whole system, and I think that's a really good example of the change that the industry that we need to see. I think it's excellent, and that should be lessons should be learned from that, definitely.
Tom, would I be right to say that under the new Building Safety Act, with the requirement for change control to be as rigorous as Paul was just saying there, that the principal critical assets, the products have got to be chosen before the end of Gateway 2?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah. So who agreed with me there? Was that Paula? No,
I'm agreeing with you. Yes, it's correct. Yes. But the key word is principle.
What that does, George and Anna, then is that removes the overlap of stage 4 and stage 5, which means we truly design it before we build it. Because you have to have it all signed off before you can even step foot on site. So the overlap goes. And that's what we all need to understand, because I could see Anna doesn't understand it.
No. I know I do understand.
Sorry, you don't agree. You don't agree with it.
I don't agree.
You and I need to have a coffee and have a good
you
talk,
can get them signed off. You can get them signed off on a performance spec. You don't have to have a full product spec at that point. That's the key.
So you don't have to name the product.
No. Or
really?
The supplier. That's my understanding.
I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure that anyone's stipulated that yet. Because if you go on a performance spec, but as Paul was alluding to, you could put a bit of kit in that needs to extract from one side or the other, and you need to be able to access it from one side or the other, which could completely change your whole spatial fit, meaning that you have to go back essentially to stage 3. So if I was the regulator, I'd be saying you have to have, and this isn't with my contractor hat on, you have to have everything pinned down and signed off before you start on site. If there's going to be workarounds like that, then we're going to still find gaps in the process.
Yeah, that won't streamline the process. And again, I keep going back to the products that I'm looking at, and it's the same thing for all the pipes and cables and everything. Is you may say I want 60 minutes here and 120 minutes here, but it might be the wrong wall, and therefore, depending on how the wall's constructed, you may not be able to get a product for it, because there's so many walls now that the products aren't tested to meet all the walls. Now it might have a fire performance, but actually where you want to put the penetration through it, then there may not be a solution to your problem. And this is, I think this is the problem that we have.
But could I just ask a question around this? Because I think we've got a fantastic group here of people's different expertise. So let's say we're looking at a compartment wall, right? Which, as I understand it, is made up of probably some dry lining. It would be doors, Emma. Yeah, so a door set. It's probably some smoke control in there as well, Paul. Yeah. So you've therefore got
and you've got ventilation and pipes and cables.
Yeah. So all of those things, therefore, I think those should be interpreted as being safety critical items. So therefore, the products that go to make those up, my reading of the situation, but maybe I've got it wrong, is that those are products that should be selected before the end of before Gateway 2. So and that if that were done, then swapping out, for example, British gypsum walls for Knauf walls, or swapping out Sentry doors for a different door supplier, or swapping out an Action Air smoke damper for something else, that presumably would be considered. Each of those possibilities would therefore be considered to be a major change. Is that right?
That's how it's Emma speaking. That's how I would perceive it. However, I think certainly the lady from Waits, Paula, I know you guys, I've worked with a couple of Waits sites before in the past where, you've got specifications through your designer build contracts, but what your subcontractors are delivering on the back end of that, because sometimes things like fire stopping are so removed from your original idea. You've got subcontractors on subcontractors on subcontractors on subcontractors. How I think the problem is, how do we control that? Because with the best will in the world, certainly Anna designing and you designing in Waits on your design and build contracts, what we can't control is what the back end is doing. And I think that's where we're getting these gaps in specification and in performance, and people making not uninformed judgments on changing products. But I think what we're seeing is people making the best of it in a situation where potentially it's been eluded, where we've not had enough space. I went to a tier 1 contractor, timber frame, block of flats. It was only 3 floors. However, they hadn't left enough spacing above the doors to put the letterboxing in order to fire stop that effectively and compliantly. And then they just said, well, can we just not just fill it with a bit of foam? And then I asked them, what services were running through it, what services were critical? Because another thing that I've picked up as well is, sprinkler pipes running through some of these HRBs and through your high critical buildings. It depends on what pipe those sprinkler systems run on and the makeup of that pipe, because certain fire stopping actually corrodes those pipes. So you might be putting 2 things together that aren't tested together. And therefore, we're having situations where you're having sprinkler pipes, which are life safety, life critical devices, that are then completely ineffective when they're needed. The other things.
I totally agree, Emma. Sorry, I know there's a couple of points there just to come back, if I may.
Yeah, of course.
So we don't design, we manage the design process. So we manage the designers at certain stages to make sure that what's being produced is buildable, or buildable in a way that we would choose to build it. So it's a collaboration. So the other thing is, to kind of top and tail, is lots of things get chucked into the CDP basket, and passive fire protection is one of them, but it should have originated as a typical detail at stage 3 from the lead designer, is my view. It's probably not Anna's view, but we could have a conversation. But we need to embellish with greater details, or greater levels of detail as we go through the stages, and we need to work together to do that. On site, they need to build to those drawings. We need to have sufficient detail. They need to build to that. If they haven't, and therefore are contravening the approved detail in terms of passive fire protection, that's a problem. That is a problem. And then when you add in that certain passive fire protection measures corrode pipes or intermittent paint, the expansion zones haven't been allowed for, all that sort of thing, this makes it all the more important that we pin it down before we even go to site and start messing about. So you're absolutely correct, and I'm absolutely aligned with you on that.
Yeah, it's just something that I've noticed. As I said, I don't, I'm not a designer or an architect by any stretch of the imagination, but I've got a lot of experience out on these sites, viewing the problems that contractors like yourselves get, or, dealing with problems where we've been called in, you know, just prior to occupation stage, where they're saying, oh, you know, the fire stopping's not been done correctly, or we're filled up with foam and we've got pink foam coming everywhere, you know, and things like we're not looking at the fact, you know, we're dealing now with other methods of construction, you know, like modular builds, timber frame builds.
Yeah.
And when you're actually looking at the test data, and I think it was Paul or Ron, or Tom that alluded to it, we don't have certain test information for certain scenarios. So if you're looking at a timber frame floor and you're looking at a penetration through a timber frame floor, there isn't actually a tested detail for that situation, because the test cost, as I spoke about on this morning's call, can run into sort of £100,000, you know, if you're testing these type of products. So I think what you're saying, Paula, I would agree with you. I think, you know, I'm working to champion a lot of this early engagement stages with competent and professional passive fire and active fire contractors before we start going on site, because we shouldn't be expecting, you know, a man with a bit of bat and mastic to solve a problem, because quite often you can't even get to the penetration to even fire stop it. So, you know, I do think, and I'm of the school, and Anna, you know, I do think we should be nailing that design down a lot earlier. Now, I completely understand things do happen on site. I'm not, you know, I don't think the world's completely rosy, but what I would say is that design, and certainly these critical components, need to be designed better and stuck to.
Paul, you've got your hand up.
Yes, no, I mean, I was just a couple of points. I mean, I think that, you know, that's absolutely right. I think one of the things that we need to be looking at is that Gateway 3 is supposed to match Gateway 2. So even if you haven't declared something, it will be found. And then I don't know what happens at that point, but I guess you don't get occupation or whatever the handover is. And
say that again. So it will be found how?
The what's built.
Yeah.
When you get to Gateway 3, must match what's at Gateway 2.
Yes.
So
true.
Gateway 2 is the design, and Gateway 3 matches the design.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. Who signs that off?
The building safety regulator.
Or when you say it's the building safety, is it the building safety? I can't remember what they're called now. Approved building control, is it?
Well, okay, yes, it is. Yes, but the point is we're talking about HRBs, so the building safety regulator is building control.
Yes.
So I'm specifically looking at HRBs because the point is, and we've got to be realistic about this, is if that starts working, then we're going to be doing all buildings like that. So, because people will realise that it's a good idea, and then it will become contractual and all the rest of it. So, and so this is the point. You know, a lot of the problems that everybody doesn't think we've had have all been solved by some bat and mastic who've done something and run off. And the reason is they didn't know better, that they shouldn't do it. Everybody else says, brilliant, the problem's solved. That's been happening continuously for the past 20-25 years. And now we're starting to see that as people are going around to inspect fire dampers, I would say that probably 90% of fire dampers have not been installed correctly. And the legacy issues that go with that is one of the things that we're trying to avoid. So, you know, they'll only have access from one side. They have no access at all. The installation's wrong. I mean, you know, just look at LinkedIn. Just do fire dampers, and it's every single building. I'm not in a lot of buildings. It's every single damper because somebody's made a decision that they're going to do it like this today. And you know, the legacy issues, which is what we're trying to avoid, they are there, and this is why it's not been a problem up until now, because contractors or subcontractors have been solving their clients' problems by doing something, and they've been doing something that they shouldn't have been doing. And because nobody wants to know about it, everybody's accepted that all the way through. And I don't think we've seen the end of that yet, but we'll see how that goes. So
I think, Paul, that's a very interesting point because it answers two questions that Jamie's put in the chat, and also Tom did as well. So what Jamie put in the chat was that the changes haven't been documented properly, and therefore what's handed over at the end of the project doesn't match what's on site. And I absolutely, agree with that. And Tom's made the point about soft landings and how that is pulled through. And Paul has made the point about the golden thread, because that actually is what I've always believed the golden thread needs to be, but it's been watered down by a lot of people more recently, and that people are considering that it's just a group of documents perhaps, but you can't audit and validate that type of thing in any sort of rigorous way. So I think that's very interesting point, Paul, that the Gateway 3 needs to be comparable with Gateway 2, what was agreed.
Yeah.
And therefore there needs to be a gap analysis there, doesn't there? I mean, is that the sort of thing that
plus
RLB are doing? Sorry.
Yeah, plus all subsequent updates to Gateway 2, yeah?
Of course.
So all
absolutely.
changes that you log, so that is in effect your golden thread. It will become much less BIM and exciting than we thought it will be, but it will be basically a collation of all of the decisions that were made during the construction and any changes that were logged.
Yeah.
I don't think you need to. You can probably track all changes if you really want to, but you probably only need to track changes that have been submitted. Yeah, exactly.
But I think the other point is it's traceable back to the original design, and I think that's something. And there's going to be an electronic record back to that.
Yes.
And that will include all the other things. And because one of the things I've been saying to people now, and to be fair, we've had Building Regulation 38 and Building Regulation 16 before that, where all this information should have been handed over. The issue we've now got is building owners are trying to find it into which basement they threw it, or worse still, which incinerator they threw it into, and it's not there. And this is the BR38 stuff as the golden thread that's now being handed over to the client, the building owner. And if they can't provide this in the future, or there's found to be holes in it, they're going to be coming to ask you for that information.
Still more strongly than that, actually, Paul. Now by law, under the amendments to Regulation 38 in August, there's now a legal requirement on the client or the responsible person to confirm that they've had it all.
Yes.
Yeah. And then when they then hand it on to so that's just to hand over a new building or where there's been a refurbishment or something like that, where there's a need for that, then they have to confirm explicitly that they've received it. That's my understanding.
Yeah.
Now that's really significant.
Absolutely, but how do they then have the competence to know that they've got everything?
Well, exactly. So that's why we need to be more explicit in terms of what that is, and simply handing them back some documents, in my view, isn't adequate for that. A lot of the information will be in documents, don't get me wrong, but we need to make sure those documents are properly referenced, so that if, for example, you do have maybe a declaration of performance or something like that. I mean, I was talking with Swegon last week, and they were saying that the for their products, these are Actionair and things like that, they will probably produce a new updated declaration of performance 5 or 6 times a year.
Yeah.
For a product, right?
Yeah.
And one of their frustrations is that people will use a previous declaration of performance. Now, what kicks in for me on that is if the people that are collating the O&M get engaged maybe 2 years into the project, and what they actually put in the O&M manual is the declaration of performance that might be found on the Actionair website, but the product that was bought and installed was 2 years before, it's going to be the wrong one, isn't it?
Well, hopefully not, because you'd hope that their DOP included all their old stuff, which
okay.
And if it's a specific product, they're increasing it rather than.
Got it. Okay.
So hopefully from that point of view, that wouldn't be the case. I mean, the other thing that people say, oh well, I bought some old stock. Well, you don't buy old damper stock because they build to order on every occasion. So yeah, that sort of issue isn't there with that sort of product. But I mean, I still come back to if as a client you go and buy a car or a washing machine, you never ask anybody whether it meets all the compliant standards or whether it's electrically safe or whether you're going to die in a fire in it. You never ask, and that's kind of, I don't quite understand what the clients are doing. However, this is a bigger investment and there are more people involved in any one place, I suppose. So maybe that's why it is. But people are relying on us.
But also client is ultimately responsible for a lot of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Client is not buying a product. Client is procuring a product or procuring a project. And ultimately, client is responsible for CDM, so for the safety of the building, because it's impossible for the design team or the contractor team to just deliver them something that they are not taking responsibility for.
Mm.
It's a very different. I get always slightly confused that people tend to compare buildings to sort of off-the-shelf products. It's just such different things.
Yeah, agreed. Richard, can I hand back to you because we've got sort of 7 or 8 minutes left. Oh no, I think actually Richard's had to.
Yeah, he went to
leave.
the West.
That's okay. Right. Okay. Yeah. So Paul Bray, are you still on the call?
Yeah, I am, George.
Yeah, I'd just be very interested in your take on what we've been discussing here, because I know that, I mean, you've done a lot, haven't you, in terms of identifying major risks and the like. Do you think we're on the right lines here?
Yeah, it's been really interesting just sat here listening to the conversations from both meetings today.
Yeah.
I think the challenges that have been talked about regarding ensuring that the installations are done correctly, i.e. by competent people, and also that you're keeping the records of that. And I just think that's the journey that we're as an industry we're going on from now on. I think the challenges are, how do you ensure that from Gateway 1, 2 and 3 that it is as designed and finished as it was designed. The interest in hearing people's views or experiences of how they procure equipment or materials, and then it may change because the supplier hasn't got what was specified. Yeah, so I think it's a massive amount of challenges going forward, but this group people seem to be very well informed to take it forward. That's my take on what I've been listening to so far today.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Yeah, so I think the other interesting thing that Tom did, he checked with from RLB, he checked with his building safety experts, Building Safety Act experts, and according to what you put in the chat, Tom. Do you want to just repeat what you were saying there?
Yeah. It's so I just happened to be sat opposite one today, and
Yeah.
the other one was online. So I've just asked the same question about, kind of the questions. It was just a simple one because we were talking about it, about the about, is this the death of the performance spec? Because we took, we're saying that at the moment things are quite loosey goosey, and things get firmed up as you go through. And they were saying, as far as we're concerned, and as far as they're concerned, and we're briefing a lot of people on the Building Safety Act and are involved with our friends in government on this, is that that's they don't see how performance specs can really go beyond Gateway 1. That it's you could maybe hit Gateway 1 with the performance spec, but it needs to be resolved very quickly as you get through into stage 3, and the design and build will continue, but it won't continue into the construction process. You will have a resolved design by the time you hit Gateway 2 that will be adhered to. What it'll do is it'll bring forward the appointments of the supply chain and those interactions and those kind of like contractual relationships, bring them ahead, and then we'll move forward. And that's where you'll be able to have this kind of these checks and balances between what was approved at Gateway 2, what has been built at Gateway 3, quick check in between if there is anything different, which there probably shouldn't be. And that when we were talking about then that the ownership, the client taking responsibility for their building, and not just and the industry not just dumping a load of information, that goes back to that soft landings, which I think will become more and more an integral part of definitely the stage 5 project delivery, where because you know what's being built, you can make sure that the client is brought up to speed with that and what their responsibility is for looking after it, maintaining and operating that kind of into beyond into stage 7, into operation and maintenance.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is what we all want. No, everybody wants this.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that I've been educated by people like Paula and Paul Matsoli, that the basically the specification, there's a descriptive specification and a prescriptive specification. Yeah. And one of the challenges I think my sort of research into this is that architects perhaps will use something like MBS Chorus to produce a descriptive specification, and it only becomes prescriptive when somebody like Emma or a manufacturer then comes along and interprets the information, because the architects that I've spoken to, although the MBS Chorus will drop in there all of the different clauses and specifications and ISOs and standards and things like that, when I've then asked the architects that are producing these things to say, what does that actually mean? They say, well, I don't know. Yeah, because they're not adequately specialist, and it's understandable because there's thousands of these bloody things. The people that actually understand how to read the fire strategy, Anna's probably going to contradict me on this now, but people that understand how to read a fire strategy and also know enough about the detailed standards for smoke control or for fire doors, they tend to be the specialists that are very much embedded in that process.
No, it's a long time since I was a contractor. I used to be a ductwork fitter, I used to run ductwork contracts years ago, 30 years ago, and fundamentally, pretty much, I would say 90% of the designs that came to us from design teams were wrong, and couldn't be built. And we would always do that redesign. And we used to lament the fact that we weren't brought in earlier just to make life easier for everybody. Occasionally we were, and it worked. I mean, architects have got a hell of a job to do. They can't be expected to understand every kind of aspect of the whole building. But this is where this bringing the supply chain forward, and the Building Safety Act as an enabler will produce better outcomes. I'm afraid that I've got to dash because I've got my next meeting about to start, and I just need to make sure I've opened the
No,
right
it's fine.
files for it.
Thank you,
But
Tom.
see you all later.
Yeah, I think it's that descriptive specification that we need to get to. You deserve a right of reply on my my comment there, Anna.
We do know quite a lot of the BSs and the ISs and the
Of course you do.
ISOs. No, I just wanted to say, with regards to the gateways and at which point we actually specify, full specification rather than performance. It's not really just to do with willingness to do it. It's to do with things coming together. I think this is. I think we should have a whole one of these sessions on how design actually develops, so that everyone understands at which points which decisions get taken. Because I think often people talk about design as though it's the willingness of the architect or the MEP designer or whoever to simply make a decision and then stick to it. It really isn't like that. So, at stage 1 and 2, we might only be discussing things like, is it concrete or is it steel? Gosh, do we know? We don't know. Okay, we might change our mind. What I'm trying to say is it's not that you don't want to make a specific specification. It's that you can't, because you're still awaiting very, very big decisions to come together. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. And it may be that all of a sudden somebody brings some retail into the project, or
absolutely, or or you may need to change the ventilation rates very late, because you've moved your rooms around and your occupancy have changed. So what I'm trying to say is it's not, we shouldn't be treating design as something that is sort of grudgingly done by designers and then just left over to somebody else to sort out. It really isn't like that. Things take a long time to come together for all sorts of reasons, and then you can make specific specifications.
I come from a design background. It just so happens I'm a main contractor now, so I understand the spiraling nature of the design process. I understand it. What we need to do is not just let it go on sporadically and
no, of course,
unraveling. As the spiral goes round, you are increasing levels of fixity, you're reducing levels of risk. That's the whole point. And there's always going to be curveballs that get in there. What we're saying is reduce the opportunity to allow those curveballs when it is to do with safety critical items. And I think on this we're all agreed.
I think we're all agreeing on that. That goes absolutely without saying.
I think that's the point. Is when somebody comes and says, oh, we can get rid of that riser and we can do this, that, and the other. You need to be aware of all the issues that then causes.
Yes.
And that may help you, because and I think, to me, I've always called it space. This is my space theory. It's space, the final frontier. People need to realise that if you want all this stuff, you've got to squeeze it in. And when you're in the building, you never see any of it. Because you're in the rooms, but there's so much stuff that needs to fit in, and it all has space implications, and I think that's what I mean by the design. I completely understand, and I see it, but if you put a wall in the wrong place, you completely change how a smoke control system would work, and you can't design it later to overcome that, because you might have put in simple thing, extended corridors. You put in extended corridors, you may need a shaft at the end of the corridor, which you probably don't want to put in.
Correct.
And it's things like. And sorry, just one more point. The you said the MBS, these terrible standard specifications that go out, and I call them. I think I mentioned that kitchen sink specifications. It's basically just a list of every single possible standard that anybody can think of that might be related to it. They're meaningless, and they're overcomplicated, and they're unnecessary. Because I could give you a smoke control damper spec today that would probably be about 4 lines long, and you could never be wrong. But if you look at the MBS, it's probably about 16 paragraphs with a load of unrelated standards that somebody might have thought were relevant at some point in time. And I don't know how we change that, but that's a different thing.
Yeah, I think that's a topic that we we could probably invite MBS. I know Stephen Hamill well, so it might be something that they're interested in participating in, because if Tom's right that descriptive specifications are going to disappear, then I presume MBS are working towards that. No, they're not.
No, absolutely no chance.
They
No
just
chance.
need to
I'm
be right
happy.
then.
I'm happy to have a bet, and we can meet in 3 years' time, and you can take me for a nice dinner. 'Cause
Okay.
I don't think things like descriptive specifications are going to disappear. I know what you mean about kitchen sink specifications, but to be honest, to specify a good fire door, you absolutely need to quote every single parameter that describes that door. You can't avoid, including security.
Fire doors, I don't argue with. I do argue with fire dampers and smoke control dampers because I know them so well.
Yeah. Well.
Okay,
yeah.
so I think we need to close it now. I hope everybody's found value from it. One thing I would ask is that, because Richard will have me over on this, the questions that we've got there, Jess, how many questions have we got? Oh, not questions, how many points have we got? There's 9 there. Are there some on the next page? Yeah, okay, so there's 14. If we send you a table that would you mind picking the top 3 or 4 that are particularly interesting from your perspective, so that we can try and put some sort of priority on these things? Is that okay? We'll send you something out, but if you wouldn't mind just taking 5 minutes to just go through them and pick the ones that you think we ought to be concentrating on, because we want to try and feed this information back to the HSE and the regulator and stuff like that, if that's okay. Right, does anybody else want to say anything, or are we done? Well, thanks very much for joining. And
Thank you, George.
Yeah,
Cheerio,
excellent.
thanks, George.
Pleasure.
Thank you,
Thanks.
bye.
Bye. Bye.
Cool. Take care, everyone.